Welcome, everyone. I am so excited you're here. Today, we're cracking open a really special classic text from the 19th century to uncover what's basically an incredible botanical guide. Now, if you're wondering what botanical means, it's all about plants. But we aren't just learning how to grow your average garden vegetables today. Oh no, in this explainer, we're going to dig into the text's time-tested guide for growing a strong, healthy, completely unbreakable tree of faith. And honestly, if you're around 10 years old right now, you are at the absolute perfect time in your life to start planting these seeds. So let's dive right in. Okay, I want you to use your imagination for a second. Have you ever been caught outside during a really heavy storm? Picture a tiny, weak little plant with hardly any roots, just sitting out there in the dirt. When the wind howls and pushes, what happens to it? It gets completely tossed around, right? Its leaves get stripped off, it gets bent entirely backward, and if the wind is strong enough, it might even get ripped right out of the ground. It's a pretty helpless feeling. Well, our source material today uses this exact picture to set up a huge problem that every single one of us faces.
Chapter 1, Tossed by the Wind.
The text actually brings up a warning from the book of Ephesians about being like little kids who get tossed to and fro, carried about by every single wind that blows. But it's not talking about the actual weather here. It's talking about our minds and our faith. It lists a few specific things that act like massive storm force winds in our lives. First, it mentions every wind of doctrine. That's basically all those confusing, swirling ideas out there that try to tell you what you should or shouldn't believe. Then it mentions the sleight of men and cunning craftiness. That's just a fancy, older way of saying there are tricks, lies, and deceptions that literally lie in wait to confuse you. If your roots aren't deep, well, every new rumor at school, every bad idea on the internet, or every tricky lie can blow you right over.
So, we're looking at a pretty stark choice here. On one side, we have that tiny plant, representing children tossed by the wind. They're like rootless leaves getting carried away by every passing breeze of a bad idea. But on the other side, we have the wide-spreading cedar. Now, a cedar is this massive, incredibly strong, towering tree that storms can't even budge. The whole goal of this explainer, and the goal of our amazing source text, is to figure out exactly how we can stop being that little tumbling leaf and become that giant, unshakable tree.
Chapter 2, Strong as a Cedar.
So how exactly do we grow those deep roots and become as strong as a cedar? The source gives us this beautiful solution, and it focuses on growing a symmetrical soul. Now, I know symmetrical sounds like a big math word, but it just means balanced. Think about it. If a tree only grew heavy branches on one side, it would get lopsided and crash to the ground, right? A symmetrical soul means your experience isn't one-sided or deformed. Instead, it's completely healthful and well-rounded. You're growing steadily in grace and in your knowledge of Christ, keeping your life perfectly balanced and deeply rooted so you never, ever tip over. There's this quote straight from the text that I absolutely love. It says, "All unawares to yourself, you will have expanded like the wide-spreading cedar, and many will profit by your counsel. Your association with them will have the fragrance of heaven." Isn't that an amazing picture? It means that if you just focus on growing balanced and strong, you'll eventually wake up and realize you've become this massive tree. You basically become a giant umbrella of safety for other people. The good choices you make will actually have the sweet fragrance of heaven, and you'll end up helping everyone around you. But here's the catch. We have to be really careful because there are things that can entirely stop our tree from growing. We can call these growth blockers, and the text literally calls this stuff rubbish. It says there are people who for years haven't grown a single inch because they just let this rubbish pile up on their roots. So what is the rubbish? Well, it's the distractions of the world. It's selfishness, only thinking about yourself. And it's indolence, which is an old-fashioned word for just being totally lazy. If you let laziness and selfishness pile up around your roots, your beautiful cedar tree is going to be completely stunted.
Chapter 3, Living in the Sunlight.
Just like a real cedar tree needs a ton of sunlight to perform photosynthesis and grow, our text tells us we have to live in the sunlight of Christ. And what happens when you step out into that sunlight? Well, the text says that if you're living in the sunlight of Christ, you'll actually diffuse or bounce that light onto others. It specifically mentions helping those who are dwarfs in the religious life, which is just a descriptive way of talking about people whose faith hasn't grown very much yet. Because you're soaking up all that warm sunlight of Christ's goodness, you reflect it right onto your friends and family who might be struggling, and that helps them grow too. The text actually lays out a highly specific logical sequence for how this growth in the light happens. It's pretty cool. First, by having fellowship with God, you grow into understanding His perfection.
Second, you grow in reverence, which means having a deep, profound respect. Third, you gain real confidence when you talk to God in prayer. And finally, you grow in faith simply by keeping your eyes fixed on Jesus. It's literally like a step-by-step recipe for spiritual photosynthesis. Every single step pulls more of that amazing sunlight right into your leaves.
Chapter 4, The Vine and Branch. Now, our explainer shifts gears just a little bit here. We're moving away from a towering cedar tree and looking at a grapevine. The text highlights this crucial, super famous quote from Jesus found in John 15:5, "Without me ye can do nothing." Now, that might sound a little surprising at first, but the text explains that we have to learn to distrust self. That means realizing that, on our own, we just don't have the energy to grow the fruit of good choices. Think about it. A little grape branch just laying by itself in the dirt can't suddenly sprout a bunch of grapes out of nowhere, right? In the same way, we can't do anything good unless we are firmly plugged into the main source of life. The author breaks down exactly how a branch works in a super simple 3-step process. Step 1, the branch abides, or stays tightly glued to Christ, who is the main vine. Step 2, because it's attached, it automatically draws up sustenance. All that water and all those nutrients flow right out of the main vine and into the branch. And step 3, because it's full of all those good nutrients, it effortlessly bears tons of wonderful fruit to the glory of God. The branch doesn't have to stress out and try super hard to make grapes. It literally just has to hold on tight to the vine.
Chapter 5, Standing Firm.
To pull this whole botanical guide together, we've got to ask, how do we make sure we stand firm every single day? Well, the text shares this incredible secret with us. You must gaze fixedly upon Jesus. Don't just glance. Really, truly look at his goodness. The author tells us that as we behold him, our hearts will keep brightening and enlarging. Just imagine your heart glowing with this fervent, bright spirit until you are literally filled right up with the fullness of God. And I promise you, when you are filled up with that much goodness, absolutely nothing can knock you down. Which brings us right back to where we started. Remember that storm and the wind? We are back to looking at our swaying leaf versus the firmly connected branch. The text promises us that when we are plugged into the vine, our branch becomes too firmly connected with the parent stalk to be swayed by every breeze. You are no longer that tiny, helpless plant getting whipped around in the storm. Because you're attached to the main trunk, those tricky winds and confusing ideas we talked about, they just bounce right off of you. So here is the core takeaway of this entire explainer. Your strength and your vigorous growth tell the world that your root is deeply planted in Jesus and that your foundation is absolutely sure. You see, you aren't just telling people you are strong, you are actively showing them by how balanced and loving your life actually is. You've cleared out the rubbish of selfishness, you're soaking up the sunlight, and your roots have dug down so incredibly deep that no storm could ever move you. I want to leave you with this final thought. You are a branch connected to the most powerful vine in the universe. If you stay closely attached, making sure to avoid the rubbish and soak up that sunlight, you are going to produce some absolutely incredible things. So take a look around at your life today, at your school, at your family, with your friends, and ask yourself, what kind of fruit will your branch grow today? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep those roots growing deep, and I'll catch you next time.